Yeah. While we're waiting to let everyone else log in, if you all would, yes, we can hear you. We can't see you. So if you would just, while we wait for others to join us, if you would just go ahead into the chat and let us know where you're from. Where are you chiming in from? I see someone up from CSSJ, Inland Empire.
Okay. Tinisch, you brought him out, huh?
Our people come out; they show up.
Yeah, I thought it was Podcast J bringing people out, but obviously it's the fantastic Tinisch. All right, you know what I mean?
I get my microphone though.
Yeah, buddy.
I love it. The part about us going virtual is that we're able to reach so many people. We've had folks from other countries, and I'm like, wow, that we weren't able to do that in the physical space, not as easily.
Yeah, it's amazing to have this reach, this audience.
So yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll get started. I see the number steadily climbing. Hello, everyone. Thanks for waving and saying hi. So we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Dimitri Broxton. I am the Director of Education at Museum of the African Diaspora. I'm very pleased to be joined by two amazing guests, which I'll introduce in just a second, from Californians for Safety and Justice. This webinar is co-sponsored between MOAD and CSJ, the Californians for Safety and Justice. Through programs, policy, advocacy, research, alliances, and communications, Californians for Safety and Justice works to advance smart justice strategies that increase public safety and reduce justice system costs. Today, we're joined by Jay Jordan, the Executive Director for Californians for Safety and Justice. Californians for Safety and Justice is the largest criminal justice reform organization in the state. Jay is the husband of the amazing Carmen Perez, president and CEO of Gathering for Justice, and he is father to a superhero. We're also joined by Tinisch Hollins, Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice State Director. Tinisch is a crime survivor and a native of San Francisco, California. Woo-hoo. She has been deeply engaged in the Bay Area social justice movement as a community organizer, policy advocate, and systems navigator for nearly 2 decades. She's worked passionately to bring the voices of survivors to the center of community engagement and public policy, and has advocated tirelessly for those voices to guide decisions, priorities, and resources. Jay and Tinisch, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for having us. I'm excited to be here. Excited.
I have been waiting for this ever since we first spoke. And I kind of want to start off with, I think questions do arise. Jay, you asked me the question the first time we spoke, why MOAD? And so oftentimes issues of criminal justice and reform and an art museum, may not make sense for folks. A few years ago, MOAD, we changed our mission to focus on contemporary art, but we also know that it's important for us to celebrate Black cultures. We want to be a space that ignites challenging conversations, and we also want to educate the community through the lens of the African diaspora. I think we'll get into some of these issues a little deeper. You are the experts on this for sure, but as folks know, Black and brown people are the ones who are most disproportionately represented by the criminal justice system and who are in prisons. And so this conversation is timely. I also want to state, before we dive into the conversation, that these issues, while they may be gaining more attention right now during the current COVID crisis, this is nothing new. And I'm definitely taking both of your leads from the conversations we've had. around that. I think it's just a little bit more awareness, and then people are concerned about what's happening. People on both ends of the spectrum. Some of us with loved ones who are incarcerated or worried about their safety and their health. And also, I also want to just say that, I saw a statistic recently that talks about how, we think about Black men and the absent Black father, but, I saw the statistic about the rapid increase of Black women who are incarcerated, and how the total population of Black women is now double of the entire prison population in the 70s, which is wild. And, also that per capita, Native American women are the highest population in prison. So I think, all these issues really wrap it around to why is Moad having this conversation? You're an art museum. So yeah, I just want to start off with you guys with finding out a little bit more about CSJ. What is it? What do you guys do?
I can kick it off, T. Okay. Yeah. So what up, y'all? I'm Jay Jordan, and as my bio says, I am a father to a superhero. My 19-month-old son is like really a superhero. So I saw something last night. I do studies late in the night, and I saw something last night. I saw a question that was really agitational, right? And the question was, if you knew everything about tomorrow, what would you do differently today? And for us at Californians for Safety and Justice at CSJ, we do know everything about tomorrow. We do know what happens when you build 30 prisons in one university. We do know what happens when you disproportionately target Black and brown communities. We do know what happens when you invest in punishment and incarceration over trauma-informed care and intervention and prevention. We do know what happens when you demoralize and institutionalize Black and brown bodies. So we know what tomorrow looks like. But the question that I posed myself after I heard that question was, well, what are you going to do about it? Right. And so Californians for Safety and Justice answered that call. We were founded in the midst of a burgeoning lawsuit, Plata versus the state of California, where one person was dying every week from a preventable medical disease in prison.
No way. Wow.
Now, if you think about like COVID-19 and this whole like hysteria around releasing people, right? Because the prison system and the jails could have easily become a COVID-infested wasteland, right? Easily, like a petri dish. Well, 10 years prior, that was happening. There was a public health crisis in California prisons, and the Supreme Court of the United States stepped in and said, you have to reduce your prison population now, or we will. And so Californians for Safety and Justice was created in 2011 to answer that call. And the first things our founders did, Lenore Anderson and then Robert Rooks, the first thing they did was they looked at how the justice system was built, right? Who was the moral center? In every movement, and look, the rise of the carceral state was a movement. In every movement, there is a moral center. You think about the civil rights, the moral center was faith, right? When you think about the creation of the carceral state, the moral center was the trauma that people were experiencing. But it wasn't the acute trauma that Black and brown people experience. It was isolated, very horrendous and horrible crimes, right? Isolated crimes. And they highlighted those crimes to help build up this carceral state, right? And so the first thing that our founders did was, hey, let's look at that a little deeper, and let's look at victims in California. And so we did the first of its kind survey of survivors around the state, and Tinisch is going to get way deeper into this. And we found that most survivors look like people on this webinar. you know,
Wow.
and they are and they experience repeat victimization. They experience trauma and crime all the time, and it's generational, but they get no help. You know, they are the most harmed, but the least helped. And yet we spending $12 billion on a safety system that's supposed to keep them safe, but does not take into account what they need. And so when we did this survey, it was surprising that crime survivors wanted healing and intervention and prevention and what happened to them to not happen to anybody else, right? The last thing on the list was prisons and jails, right? When you think about safety, which is the core human value that we're talking about in the criminal justice system, is safety. When you think about safety, you know, you don't think about prisons and jails. You think about fresh cut grass, Sunday dinner, two-hand touch football, pickup games, you know, like that's safety, safe communities. And so why is all of our tax dollars going to prisons and jails when what we consider to be safety is the polar opposite, right? And so that's what we do. If you think of us as, in terms of an organization, as a plane, on one wing, we organize crime survivors who are calling for a greater investment in intervention, prevention, and healing, right? And alternatives to massive incarcerations, right? And on the other wing, you have people with past convictions, right? There's 70 million of us in the country, 8 million in California alone, right? And we face over 40,000 legal restrictions, right? Long after we serve our sentence, which we'll get into. We'll get into like just this craziness of the system. And the people with convictions and their families are raising awareness about these barriers and are calling for not handouts, but just the system to move out their way so they can take care of themselves and their families. And where the plane is headed is this concept of shared safety. This intrinsic human value that safety is a job for everybody and not just the men and women in law enforcement. Safety includes mental health. It includes public health. It includes education. It includes employers. It includes the faith community, and it includes the people who are impacted by crime and trauma, and the people that do, commit crimes. That is safety, right? All working together to ensure the health and wellness of the community. Last, I'll end with this, and I want to pass it over to Tinisch to talk more about CSSJ. Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, which is our flagship program. Safety is not just the absence of crime, but it's the presence of well-being, right?
Thanks. Thanks for saying that. That was definitely a question, because I feel like safety is this. Oftentimes, security companies are using the term safety. And so oftentimes the word safety conjures these issues of keeping bad things out. But it sounds like you both are defining it, or your organizations are defining it in a much broader spectrum. So I'm glad you're going into that.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get all the way into safety. We're gonna dig all up in that thing. And so yeah, that is what we lead with. We look to in order to get to that shared safety environment, shared safety communities. We take money we look for ways to take money from a bloated prison system and jail system, a carceral state, right, and put that money and invest it into schools and trauma recovery centers and employment opportunities and at-risk youth, like all the things that we know that prevent crime from happening, instead of waiting for crime to happen and then deal with it, right? And we do that through running ballots. We do that through passing legislation. And we do that through administrative advocacy. And we dibble and dabble in some litigation when it's warranted, right?
Okay.
And on both sides of the plane, on our Crime Survivor for Safety and Justice side, organizing survivors, and our Time Done side, organizing people with past convictions, we have a robust set of members who we really drive our agenda, from the ground up drive the way we move, help drive. They are the fuel of the plane. We can't get off the runway. We can't even turn the plane on unless it's the voices of survivors. It's the voices of people with past convictions saying, we want this. And that gives us the fuel to go and fly this plane and hopefully land it in the concept of shared safety. So I'll stop there and hand it over to Tinisch to dig a little bit more into crime survivor safety and justice, how it was created, and the amazing stuff that they're doing, right now.
Oh yeah.
Thank you. I mean, you spoke to some of it. And I think usually the question that I get when folks ask about CSSJ and our work and its connection to criminal justice reform is why and how are crime victims speaking up on reducing incarceration? Where does that voice get in? And that's exactly what we do. We do organize crime survivors. We have a network of over 12,000 in California, over 40,000 across the country. And our entrance into this conversation is because there was a voice missing driving the public safety priorities. And if you look at the history of our approach to dealing with crime and violence in this country, the narrative, to be tough on crime, the approach to dealing with crime was really built on the backs of crime victims, the voices and stories of crime victims. And Jay just pointed to, another well-known fact is that those voices and experiences were not reflective of Black and Brown communities and communities that were most impacted by crime and violence. Horrible experiences, yes, but not lifelong experiences of victimization. And so our voices were missing in really guiding and informing what we know we need to be and feel safer in our community. The other issue that has long been glossed over is the negative impact that incarceration, mass incarceration, has had specifically on Black and Brown communities in the diaspora, and how that's impacted us, the separation of families, the billions of dollars that have been pushed into a system and approaches that have not kept us safe and have not worked, and very little left over for crime victims. And then adding a layer on top of that, the identity of a crime victim not being assigned to Black and Brown people.
Yeah.
Not having the compassion, not having the empathy, not having the access to support that we've needed for a long time. And, Jay and I will share our personal stories, but it very much aligns with, what we do now and why we do it. What we saw 40 years ago, and you can even go back further, is just being perpetuated today. Victimization and Black folks, that has been actively legislated against for generations. Right. And so that is having an impact on us and our communities, especially as it relates to safety. So the work that we do is creating an opportunity for crime survivors, people who have been impacted by crime in their communities, who have not been representative in these conversations around safety, to be brought into the center. And we do that by organizing with crime survivors throughout the country. But here in California, we have 8 chapters. Our chapters are headed up by other survivors who create a network of healing, bringing survivors into a space where they're able to receive support in sharing their story, but also get the support to transition and take their healing to action. So, much like any other, many other experiences, you learn how to move through by being in community with people who are moving through. And that is one of the things that we're able to offer through our network, is a network of support for survivors who never got that support, never got an opportunity to share their stories, never got an opportunity to be a part of crafting the solution to what they feel like they need to be safe and to not feel harmed again in their communities.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely want to hear more about the two of you. Whatever you mind sharing about how you got involved in this work. You guys are doing big, huge things, but what got you involved?
Okay. Well, you mentioned I am from San Francisco. I'm from Bayview, Hunters Point. That's my home community. Grew up in a strong family, strong community. But unfortunately witnessed a lot of crime and violence, especially in the 80s and 90s, post-crack, post-war on drugs, completely fractured our community and all the families. long before I had personal experiences with violence in my family, I saw the impact of violence on my community. And what I saw was the response to the violence was to penalize the entire community, parents, people who are struggling with addiction, the children, schools were, penalizing families for truancy. And what I knew is that a lot of the people in my community, the majority of the people, and even some of the folks who were committing crimes at the time had one thing in common. They wanted to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
Like incidents of violence were happening because people were in fear of their lives. Retaliation was happening. A lot of things were happening because people had this desperate need for safety that wasn't getting met. And add on that poverty, trauma, lack of opportunity, it just became, a real breeding ground. And then these policies,
Sure.
on top of it, that created a pipeline of moving people out of our community. So what that said to me was that you all are part of the problem. You are the problem. And that just didn't sit well with me because I knew my family, I knew my community, I knew a lot of the people who were being impacted and involved, and I knew what they wanted was to be safe and that they weren't a part of the conversation. So I became an organizer without even knowing that's what it was. It had a name. Obviously, I have a problem speaking up. So I kind of ended up in a lot of spaces because I wasn't afraid to speak up. But it really took me on a path, a career path of centering the voices of folks who are not often consulted and brought into conversations around what they need in their community. And so I did that for a long time. And my first instinct was to protect and support my family through my work. Unfortunately, a lot of people close to me lost their lives and were directly impacted by violence. Every male member of my family has been to jail or prison. And this struggle, this journey to achieve safety in my community was, really centered on my family. In 2013, I lost a brother to gun violence. He was 25. And then in 2017, I lost a second brother to gun violence.
Wow.
Devastating impact on my family. There is no recovery point, when you experience that level of trauma. But years of organizing in the community, working to prevent violence, working to support other crime victims, 20 years later, when these experiences happened in my family, unfortunately, I noticed a lot of the same patterns. The support wasn't there. There was an immediate question as to what happened? What did you do? What role did you play in creating this circumstance? What role did your brothers play, in
my goodness
circumstance? So that dehumanizing the situation, and unfortunately not getting the support that we needed, but also dehumanizing my brothers, and their experiences that led up to those incidents where they lost their lives. Having that reality after years of doing the work really caused me to move into a space where I had to look at what is the root cause. We're all organizing for things. We're all organizing for jobs and housing and all that. What is the root cause that we need to address to prevent this from happening again? And it was unaddressed trauma. It's unaddressed trauma in our communities. So, my connection to CSSJ has really been aligning with this belief that the old systems and approaches haven't worked, never kept any of us safe. Unfortunately, has led to our community being disproportionately impacted, both by the system and as victims, and particularly Black women and Black mothers. And so how do we shift this so that the investments are going in the right place so that we can stop this cycle, from happening? So
that's incredible that's incredible for you to take that personal trauma and take it into action. I think so many times people are like, that's just how it is. It's too big of a problem. I can't do anything about it. So hats off for that. Thank you so much for sharing that story.
Thank you. Yeah. Jay.
And Jay, what brought you, if you don't mind sharing, what brought you into this field?
Every time I hear Tinisch's story, just like it takes me a little minute to sit with it.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, it's
for me it also connects to my own personal story. I think I grew up in East Oakland, and my experiences with trauma from family members being shot and killed were from a very young age, and I remember just growing up thinking this is just how it is, and then it wasn't until I left my community that I started to realize, wait, this isn't how everyone grows up. This is not the American experience that everyone has.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm changing it through art. I like to believe, but I think you guys are the ones that are at the forefront, on the front lines, making it happen.
Yeah. So like, I'm the son of an old country preacher from Okmulgee, Oklahoma, and my mom's a city girl from Watts, right? And
oh wow.
Yeah. So I'm like a mix of both, man. It's wild. And so, I grew up in Stockton, North Stockton. Stockton has this. It's a gritty little city, man. And like I remember at an early age, I just was thrown into it. Pops in the church house, and I was just like, I was running the streets, and ended up going to prison for 8 years. And in my journey in prison, and I don't talk about like the things that happened in prison, because my journey wasn't like I got my college degree. Like, nah, I was, it was active in there. You know what I mean? And so, now you kind of see a different narrative coming out of folks who are in prison, because we've done a lot of work in ensuring that rehabilitation is accessible in there. I don't like the word rehabilitation, but like just to like classes, you know what I mean? Like, massaging people's creative side, and allowing them to grow within themselves. Just providing that access to folks who are doing time is like, I think, monumental. And so like when I was there, it wasn't really that. And so I was active. I remember I ended up doing 2 years in the hole, and this Rasta man, he asked me who I was through the vent, because all you can talk to each other in the vent, they're like the little vent, and that's how you communicate. That's your phone, And I remember I answered him with like just a whole sound off. I'm whoop de whoop from whoop 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 whoop, and he was like, nah, that's what you are. Ask who you are. And that really set me on this journey, that I'm still on. A lot of times being Black, in America, what Baldwin say, to be Black and relatively conscious is to be, in perpetual state of anger, right? And so, like for me, when I realized that everything that I put on myself and society put on me, like was like this label, and so I really start to dig deep and say, man, who really am I, right? And what impact do I want to make? And so when I end up getting out, like that's what I took with me, was like, who do I want to become? And like, how am I impacting the world every single day? Right. No matter if it's a negative impact, because sometimes I get up and it's like, screw it, I'm just like, somebody gonna get it today. You know what I mean? I get an early email.
That's real.
I don't know how to be the respond to an email in a nice way. I'm gonna respond the way I'm, would normally
feel it in that moment.
Yeah, I ain't got the corporate speak yet. I ain't raised that level yet. I'm gonna tell you how I feel, man. And so but like I remember getting out, and I had all these plans, right? Like, I'm supposed to, the first thing we're going to own a bar. Well, start cutting hair, because I can barber, contrary to popular belief. I can get down, you know what I mean? Like this don't let the smooth chase fool you, man. I can do it. I was going to cut hair. I was going to, sell used cars. I had a hookup for selling insurance, and I went to sell real estate. That was like my 4-prong attack. And then I was doing this vending machine business on the side.
Wow.
Vending machine business was rolling. Everything else fell through because of my conviction. Like I couldn't do none of that because I have felonies. I didn't know that, And so like, it wasn't really until I started dealing with kids and doing mentoring, and I had a whole plan to start this nonprofit, this program in Stockton for the kids. And the school district told me that I couldn't do that because I had a felony.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, so I can't even volunteer. And I began to research. I'm like, well, who? And I began to question myself because of what I was going through. And I really resented that. And so I said, if I'm going through it, how many people else are going through this? And so I that's when I really started my advocacy journey. I was already doing dibbling and dabbling and like organizing inside. And then when I got out, but I just hopped right into it, working on campaigns, worked on Michael Tubbs' campaign, shout out to Tubbs. And then I got good at it, worked on some school board campaigns, was a field director for a congressional campaign, won that. And I just hopped into LA. I just moved to LA, man, and started working for Pico. And I remember it was so crazy because everybody had thought I made it. 2014.
I mean, compared.
You know what I mean? Yeah, I had like all these awards. I was on TV, but I was broke. Like I was broker than broke, man. Like, I think I had like, I moved to LA with like $100 and something in my bank account.
Wow.
On like faith, and my granny was staying in an assisted living facility. I moved down there, and I remember it was her and my sister staying there. And I'm like, look, I'm gonna put my boxes in here, and I'm gonna sleep in my car. So I slept in my car for 3 months.
Oh my goodness.
I was homeless, sleeping in my car for 3 months, and this is after all the success I had in Stockton. But I was like, yo, I want to make a real impact. And Stockton is great, but it was just no opportunity for me there. And I got a job working part time, was homeless, ended up getting an apartment with that was like $900 a month. Like 700 square feet. It was in the hood. Everyone around me spoke Spanish. I was like, we survived. It was cool. But then I worked my ass off down there. I was organizing crime survivors in churches. And this is before I even knew about CSJ really. And I was organizing in the Westmont area, mothers who had lost sons and daughters to gang violence.
Wow.
And, I was organizing them. Robert Rooks came knocking, our CEO came knocking and was like, hey man, you want a job? I'm like, I got a job. He's like, man, but you want a real job? I'm like, I got a real job. And so, that was 5 years ago. And now I'm the ED of CSJ, and
that is amazing.
Yeah.
So from what both of you are telling me is you are defying the odds, just who you are by doing what you're doing. This is not how the system is set up for anyone in your situation. You got kids at home. I just kind of wanted to talk about, jumping back into our current state. The topic of this is thinking about, the current situation and resiliency, community resiliency during this COVID-19 crisis. Has your work changed as a result of the current health crisis? Which ways? And then also, like I started off saying, there's a lot of coverage of COVID-19 and prisons and prisoners being released right now in the media. But what critical information do you think is missing? So I guess that was 3 questions.
Yeah, so I'll kick it off. I'm sorry, Cinco de Mayo. My wife is like doing her glico down there, and she's like having a ball. Like on Tuesday, it's happening for real. So one thing that COVID did was it like highlighted like some of these policies that were really, in my mind, and what it felt like as this thing hit and we began to look at what was going on and how, we were calling for like releases, and then we talked to our members, because we instantly like turned inward and say, okay, let's talk to our members. The first thing we do, let's just talk to our members. So we started talking to our members, and it was apparent, man, that, in any crisis, it just exasperated what was already going on. Right? Like it was almost like these laws were like legislating against Blackness or something. You know what I mean? It was just like this like apparent, gaps in resources, right? Apparent, case in point, right? We were calling reentry providers, right? Because we work with a network of reentry providers, and we start calling reentry providers, And I'm like, hey, how y'all doing? You know, they're going to release all these people. Are you excited? They're like, excited? Like, man, we don't even have personal protective gear. We're not even considered essential services, right? We're not even considered essential workers. And these trauma recovery centers weren't considered essential workers, right? Like there was no telehealth services. And so, you know, you have to look at the nonprofit sector that provides and what we call critical assistance to vulnerable populations, right? Look at them as really an extension of government, right? Because how the money flows, and it's all about the money. How the money flows is it goes from our pocket. We buy gas, we buy whatever, you know, our tax dollars go to the government, right? And then it goes through whatever state entity that controls the money. In the criminal justice system, it's the Board and State of Community Corrections. You know, it's probation, it's parole, and then they grant the money out to community-based organizations, and the community-based organizations are the ones that are administering the services, right? And so that critical piece of our society was left out of any response to COVID. You know, and what government did was turn inside. And it was like, okay, all of our county departments, all of our state departments, let's survey all the state workers. Let's ensure that the government can respond to this thing. And what they neglected to understand is in communities across this state and across this country, it is not government that we depend on. It is these community-based organizations that are our lifeline and ambulances to safety and to wellness and to health. And to take that away from people, it's just irresponsible. And so we saw a huge gap all around the country about this critical assistance infrastructure not being taken into account in the response to COVID. And so our response to that response, you know, to take a quote out of what's the guy's name? I can't think of it. But the critique of the critique, right? The response to the response is, you know, we need to stop the spread, but stopping the spread means we need to invest in critical assistance infrastructure. And that's what we did. And that was the largest gap that we saw, right? When you think about the violence interrupters, right? They weren't considered essential workers. They weren't given, you know, personal protective equipment. When you think about, you know, the reentry service providers or the housing providers, right? When you think about the trauma recovery centers, when you think about the healers and the people who folks depend on in that community to solve issues, right? The woman who everybody goes to when, you know, they are experiencing domestic violence, right? Those are, you know, we are a very communal people, and in Black communities around this country, right? The individuals and the organizations that serve us were just left out. And that was scary for us. And it really highlighted how easy it is to just discredit, for government to discredit the work, the hard work of individuals. And so the result of this with this, and I want to, you know, hand it over to T, because I know she was itching over there to talk about like just how like the gaps and the breakdowns are like just, you know, the like the result of that was, and I'll give you an anecdote. Our brother Edward Harris, right? You know, he gets out from Centinela, right? Under the COVID releases. They tell him he was supposed to get out in August. They tell him, hey, you're getting out next week. This was like 3 weeks ago. They show up like 3 days later with a black trash bag, give him the black trash bag and say, put all your stuff in the trash bag. He puts all the stuff in the trash bag. They put him in the van. They drive him to Riverside Marietta jail and say, oh, you have a warrant that you got to take care of. And he was like, what? You know, you should have told me that, right? And so he was like, okay. He called me from the Marietta County Jail. Now, mind you, Marietta down in Riverside County was where the 2 officers succumbed to COVID.
Oh, wow.
So they were infested. They were infected with COVID there. So he stays there for 3 days, comes to find out it was a technicality that he wasn't supposed to have a warrant. They release him at 9:00 at night in the rain with nothing. And so luckily we stepped in and now he's in a hotel. We got him some clothes and food and got him all the stuff. But that just shows you one person that have fell through the cracks. And there are thousands of stories like that. And that's what COVID really highlighted, is the lack of coordination and the respect that folks who have been doing this work for years and years and years deserve.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy. Thanks for sharing that story. I hadn't heard that one yet.
Yeah, and you're right. It just exacerbated, shed a light on things that we've always known. It's been mentioned a few times, even in this webinar, about how we've been actively legislated against and left out, and when you think about our community providers, the one thing that often gets left out of the conversation, in addition to resources, is trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when there's a crisis in our community, we're not inclined to pick up the phone and call the police or call 911. When there's a conflict in our household, we're not inclined to call the state agencies, because many of them, their involvement lead to pulling families
Mm-hmm.
apart, children being removed, partners being taken out of the household and then being restricted from coming back. There's no resolution, that leads to keeping a relationship in the community. So when you call these outside entities, that means that you are potentially running the risk of people being removed from your life, maybe even permanently. So that trust in our community is invaluable, to be able to pick up the phone and call somebody. And that was, in addition to this collective trauma that we're all experiencing as a result of this global pandemic and, uncertainty about what can and will happen. There's this real fear about what happens to me in this moment and can I get my needs met? And then we also had our community providers who are living in the same conditions, same challenges, same limitations, but still showing up for their people. And, thinking about some of the stories that we've heard, even in this crisis, violence has not stopped in our community. Lives are still being claimed by gun violence. DV is up. Child abuse, I've heard, is up. And we know that our families are disproportionately impacted by all of those issues. So just really looking at what people need right now in this moment, and then reflecting on, decades of conversations that we've had around infrastructure. We know, and this climate really does, highlight the fact that we've never been considered essential. Never been considered essential. Community responders have never been considered essential. The service and the trust that we have for each other in the service we provide has never been deemed as essential anywhere, which is why we're often left out of the funding, we're left out of the strategy, we're left out of the conversation. Goes back to what I said in the beginning, you're part of the problem. And so hearing that in this moment of desperation was heartbreaking. But what was also, very real is that we didn't stop showing up. Our community is still showing up, still meeting the needs of folks who are coming out of incarceration, still going to check on families in the wake of violence, still helping people figure out how to do things like hold a funeral service.
Wow. Yeah.
I scrolled down the timeline maybe 3 times in the last 3 weeks, and people were holding digital funeral services on Facebook Live so that family members could be there. Where else, when else could you experience this level of trauma and have so many different layers on top of it? We're not even considering, the digital divide and how many people can't even have an option to connect or grieve in that way. And so a lot of very real issues that have been here for a very long time. But one thing I will say is the opportunity, and I think I heard Robert mentioned this the other day on another platform that he was on, is that, in situations like this, this is where systems are formed, to respond to. This is where systems, and even if the intent is not for those systems to inflict harm on us, if we're not involved and active in really elevating what needs to happen to take care of our people, those systems do inflict harm on us. So I'm proud of the way that we are, engaging, our members, our survivors, our folks who are formerly incarcerated, those who are coming out, and all the reentry providers to be a part of really guiding these systems, whether they are in existence or being formed in this moment, to make sure that we're centered. And that infrastructure piece is critical, right? Because our on the ground service providers deserve to have the stability. They deserve to have the respect to be deemed essential, and they need to be supported in that way. They need to be invested in that way.
Just to think about that though, oh my, like that word, even you are not essential. Like what? Like wow. Like wow. Like you were not essential. So therefore, like you get no funding, no resources. We better not catch you outside. Like you are not essential. Like that for me, like oof, that really angered me and us as an organization, to say that, you know, the people who show up every single day and put their lives on the line to do this work, the violence interrupters who are out in these streets, right? Stopping gang wars, stopping, you know, people from losing their lives. We are saying they are not essential. What does that say about us as a society? Like just this system that's created is all it took is like a pandemic, you know. And I want to just flag this, and since it's Moab, I'm gonna say it. If you look at like what type of leadership we pivoted to in this moment, look on TV.
Exactly. Yeah.
You don't see no black folks up there. You don't see no a lot of women up there. You don't see no brown folks up there. It's white males leading this conversation, right? And saying we're going to take control and we're going to show you what to do. And it was just so, and we just it just happened. It just happened, and it just played out right in front of our eyes. All we had was Don Lemon. You know,
we might be in trouble there.
Yeah. No, he was holding it down though, right? He was holding it down. You know, he was holding it down.
So how are you continuing? I mean, you know, how are you continuing to do this work given that structure? I know things are starting to open up, but like, has that impacted the ability for you to do the work that you do?
So,
and providing those, and I'm going to call them essential services.
Yeah. I would say this, right? Like Tinisch said, they didn't stop. They didn't stop. That's the difference between government, right, and our people. Right? Our people have been through worse, you know, way worse. We've been through a lot, right, throughout the span of history, and so our folks didn't stop. They were out there still doing the violence interrupting, still answering the call, still, like, you know, folks were, it got so bad, right? And it's still bad, but it got so bad that two of our partners in Oakland, Boss and Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, they set up tables in front of the county jail and were giving people personal protective gear and like food and hotels, right? Like, because it was just no coordination. Right? Like, people were still answering the calls for trauma. Like, they were still doing it. Right. And so the essential services didn't stop. We're advocating for, but this is an opportunity. I want to talk about the opportunity. Like, there is a great opportunity. You know, I for one believe that there is opportunity in chaos, you know, and, you know, pressure makes diamonds. Right. And if we do not, to Rob's point, if we do not create the new normal, if we don't begin talking about the New Deal, then they will. And I say they, meaning the folks who are creating the policies, you know, that are going to move us out of this. Right. Like, you've seen what happened after 9/11. You know, it was after 9/11, we got the Patriot Act. We got the rise in a background check company, right? Which is the reason why I can't do a lot, because the background check companies are now prevalent and 90% of employers and 90% of landlords are doing background checks. We got that from 9/11, right? It had nothing to do with people committing crimes in California, right? And so, like, what is our response? And I think our response in this moment is that we need a public health lens, a public health metric to how we view harm and trauma and safety. right? Like if we continue to do the things that we're doing, the way that we're doing it, right, then we are going to answer that question. I mean, the answer to that question that I asked at the top of this webinar is going to be, I wouldn't do anything differently, right? That's going to be our answer if we don't move. But we know if we don't act right now and say, hey, 40 years of failure. You gave us 40 years of failure. You gave us 40 years of trauma. You gave us 40 years of locking Black people up. You gave us 40 years of horrible maternal health. You gave us 40 years of chaining women when they're having baby in prison. You gave us 40 years of separating people from their family. You gave us 40 years of treating an addiction as criminal. You gave us 40 years of killing unarmed Black men. You gave us 40 years of killing unarmed Black women. You gave us 40 years of over-policing our community. You gave us 40 years of prison. You gave us 40 years of pain, right? And if we don't say enough is enough right now, like we're not going to allow you to continue to do the same thing over again after this global pandemic has shined a bright light on how horrible prisons are, how horrible the responses to trauma and crime and harm are in our communities. Right.
Yeah.
So
then we're just being complicit.
Right. And so there is a way to shift. California is facing a $50 billion budget deficit. And there's going to be some, and there are going to be some cuts. There's going to be some cuts to the budget. Where are they going to cut? Where are they going to cut? I can tell you one place they can cut.
They're not going to cut the prisons.
right. I'm saying they got $13 billion of our money. $13 billion, man. $13 billion. So I'm saying, like, when we talk about administrative advocacy, when we talk about legislating, when we talk about ballots, like those are the things we all need to be focused on, but locally. This is you have the state fight, but locally we need to zero in on locally, zero in on Oakland, zero in on Frisco, zero in on Stockton. Like if you're listening and you hear this, down the road in the recording, and you're trying to figure out what to do, where to put your energy at, man, look at your local budget. Look at your local budget and see where they're going to slash. I guarantee you, if the public does not speak up, they're going to begin to slash schools. They're going to begin to slash behavioral health and public health programs. They're going to begin to slash what they call non-essential services, which is like parks and recs. And so we got to pay attention to budgets. We got to pay attention to where they're going to cut, because we're going into a recession. They're talking about budgets and they're talking about cuts. The state's going to cut. States all around the country are going to cut. Cities are going to cut. Counties are going to cut. We got to figure out where they're going to cut and ensure that the things we care about don't get cut.
Before we end, I just want to let folks know that are listening. You are invited to post questions on the Q&A, or you can also slide into the chat. And Jay and Tinisch can answer any of the questions that you have. I also, before we go off, I wanted you to talk a little bit more about some of the ways people can find out more about CSJ and CSSJ. Also, how can they become involved? And I also want to say, I guess it was a little less than 2 weeks ago, I had a chance to see the first ever virtual crime survivors speak conference, which was amazing, blew my mind. I don't know if folks can still see that, but if you could tell people how they can, get involved, find out more about the work.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the virtual conference was amazing. First time we've ever done it, and we did it. So, as always, we rise to the occasion. But CSSJ's work, again, in California, we have 8 chapters. We encourage folks to visit our website, cssj.org. You can sign up to become a member there. You can send a message to us. We'll make sure you get connected to the chapter in your region. We're going to continue to stay engaging folks through digital events. Survivors Speak. The video is available, so we've been sharing it on our Facebook page. We also have links to YouTube, so we can share those links with folks so you can watch. But a ton more advocacy, and just kind of piggyback on what Jay was mentioning about our voices really mattering in this moment, as the whole country pivots to respond to COVID. We've heard a lot of conversation about the disparities and the disproportionate impact on Black folks in this country of COVID. And I really want to urge us to continue centering that, and not just when government brings it up. Like, it has to be our priority to keep raising those disparities, no matter what the numbers and the data show, because we have decades of data to demonstrate the need for us and our lives to be deemed as essential. And the leadership that we're seeing in this moment, look at San Francisco as an example, is coming from Black women, but it's also coming from people who have been directly impacted, people who grew up in public housing, people who have been impacted by violence and trauma. And so our voices are essential. And CSSJ is just one way of staying involved in those conversations, but those are the voices of the folks that you turn to in your community when it goes down. So we want to make sure that those voices, our people in our community know that our organization is centering on our needs, and we want to make sure that they have an opportunity to get involved in our work.
Thank you. Oh, yep, I heard Inako says go to the CSSJ website for more information.
Thank you, Inako.
That's right.
Man, she got the Inland Empire on fire.
That's right.
I love it. And anything else you want to add in, Jay?
I appreciate you having us. I can't wait till we get off of lockdown so we can do this in person.
Right.
Yes, for sure.
In person, man, and like really vibe and be in community, man. I'm cautiously optimistic. I mean, on Friday we go into phase 2. And so more places are opening up. It's looking like we're bending the curve. I would be remiss if I didn't tell folks to, continue to shelter in place, continue to be safe, continue to, not just for you, but for somebody you may not know that, and so, it's important. Don't be like what you see on the news and go to the beaches and start protesting like, we good, we'll be all right. And so, yeah, man, I am hopeful, and the reason I have hope because of my ancestors. And, I'm always think about what type of ancestor do I want to be? And like, in this moment, what type of ancestors do we want to be? And let that guide us.
I love that. Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate you taking the time with MOAD. If folks want to see this, if you came in later, we will have this also posted on. It was streaming live on our Facebook. It was also streaming live on our YouTube channel, and we will have it archived there, so you'll be able to see the rest of the conversation. And please share it out. Let me see. I got one more thing coming in on the chat. Thank you so much. Nia just went ahead and posted the different different places folks can find out about the information.
That's right.
And we'll also be having these same resiliency during coronavirus conversations every single Tuesday at 4:00. So please visit our website, moadsf.org, to find out more about that. Also check out both CSJs at csj.org.
It's safeandjust.org and CSSJ.org. Go check us out. Yo, and if you got a cell phone and you want to join Time Done, text Time Done to 72345. Time Done to 72345. Join the movement.
All right. Yes, the conversation will be available on the Museum of the African Diaspora's YouTube page. And then we also want to let everyone know that next week, we're shifting it to 2 p.m. We'll have Amy Allison of She the People. So that'll be at 2 p.m. All right. Well, thank you so much. You guys have a wonderful day and keep up the good fight. Love it.
All right, brother. Peace.
All right. Power.